He's only okay at interneting, but he's great at dadding. Yes, it's time to celebrate the guy with the cell phone holder, the thermostat watcher, the lawn aficionado known as Dad. This Father's Day, give him something he'll love more than his transitional lenses. Give the man some #1 drinks that'll go perfectly with his #1 dad mug. And get them all from Drizzly, the go-to app for alcohol delivery. With Drizzly, you can shop local stores and can compare prices on beer, wine, and spirits, and then get them all delivered in time to celebrate Dad, Pa, Father, Daddy, Pops, Daddy-O, the big dude, or whatever you call him. You'll get the 2-thumbs-up dad-proval, and ordering just takes a tap. Download the Drizzly app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com today. Ding dong, it's Drizzly. Must be 21 plus, not available in all locations.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. This week on our panel we have AJ O'Neill.
Yo, coming at you live from gloomy, rainy, cloudy Virginia. Why?
Dan Shapir.
Coming at you from Tel Aviv, where I've been locked down for 3 weeks and I'm starting to go nuts.
Amy Knight.
Hey, from lockdown Nashville.
Steve Edwards.
I think he's
right.
going to say hey from his meeting.
Yeah, that's right. He had a meeting
shortly.
and he's going to jump in when he can. I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv. Quick shout out about JS Remote Conf. Go check it out, jsremoteconf.com. We have a special guest this week, and that is Matt Crook. Matt, do you want to say hi?
Sure. Hello, everybody, and thanks for having me. I'm actually currently Nashville Software School student. Just to introduce myself really quick, I'm actually halfway through the program right now and working on my front-end capstone basically as we speak. So I'll be presenting that next week. And just a quick history about myself. I previously worked in the music business for 5 years. Started out in project management and then moved into more of like business intelligence and business operations roles, and then into contracting services, analytics and data analytics and stuff like that. And that's kind of how I got into programming. So yeah, we can definitely talk a little bit more about that today.
When it comes to test maintenance, the biggest complaint that teams have are flaky tests. Tycho is a Node.js library built to test modern web applications. It creates highly readable and maintainable JavaScript tests. Its simple API, smart selectors, and implicit weights all work together toward a single goal, fixing the underlying problem behind flaky tests to make browser automation reliable. Tycho is open source and free to use. Head to tycho.dev and get started. That's TAIKO.dev. Nice.
But before that, you said music. What did you do in that industry?
Yeah, so really long story. I initially started out as a musician. I am a drummer. I did that for about 9 months. I was basically on the road and, trying to make it as a musician. Toured for 9 months and realized that it really wasn't something I wanted to do and wasn't everything that I thought it would be. And so I basically used my degree in music business. I did go to Belmont University here in Nashville, and I worked at a label. And that's kind of how I got into the business. And yeah, I worked at a label and publisher or a couple of different ones for 5 years. And then, kind of making my way into programming.
That's really interesting because my son is actually studying to be a professional drummer.
Awesome. Yeah, it's definitely fun.
Yeah, and I just wanted to chime in. I mean, we met, I think, right before you wound up going to Nashville Software School. So it's kind of going to be interesting, at least for me, to kind of catch up on where that is and what the story is there. In fact, do you want to kind of get us started with that? Just how that all came about and, where you're at now as far as what your experience has been?
Yeah, sure. So, and definitely talking to, a couple different mentors that I've had and just people that have gone through the program a couple years ago, 5 years ago and stuff like that. I think the program has definitely changed a lot over the years. But basically how I decided to go there and how I got into all of this was, as I mentioned before, my data analytics role that I was doing previously. I worked with a lot of developers and worked on different tools to build apps and automate processes and things like that. And I really enjoyed that aspect of everything. So I started teaching myself programming on the side. At the time, I really didn't even know about bootcamps. I had no idea about this industry. I don't really come from anyone that's computer literate in my family. I'm pretty much the only one. And up until college, basically, and using Excel, I've always been computer illiterate, I guess you could say. So after teaching myself for a couple months or so and getting into it and diving into JavaScript especially, Actually ran into someone at the gym. We just started talking and getting to know each other, and they mentioned boot camps, which, like I mentioned, this was like a totally new concept to me. I had no idea about boot camps, and they mentioned Nashville Software School. And so I looked it up, did some research for myself, and decided that that was the thing to do, especially because I wanted to sort of fast track myself onto that career path or track. Just because, I mean, we can get into this as well. In my mind, and I've heard this said before as well from someone else, is that boot camps are really just trading time for money. Because yes, I could have continued to teach myself programming. It was just a better option for myself to go for 6 months, go through this, intense and thorough program in the environment that it provides. And in 6 months, come out with fairly good skills, as a junior developer and, start my new career that way.
So I've never been involved with the boot camps. I'm old school, I guess. So I'm not really familiar with this whole process. Can you describe how boot camps work and what the process is?
Yeah, sure. So starting from the very beginning, I mean, obviously it's probably different for different boot camps, but with NSS or Nashville Software School, initially there is sort of a interview/vetting process in which I would highly advise anyone that's thinking about a boot camp to make sure that there is some sort of vetting process, because some of them are nonprofit, some of them are for-profit, and you kind of want to make sure that the boot camp has a reputable reputation in the industry. With NSS so far, for the first 3 months, we started out a little bit slow, which was surprising to me, with HTML and CSS for the first 2 weeks, and then really ramped up the learning and intensity, I guess you could say, with JavaScript. And yeah, that's where people started to cry. And it got a little bit hard after that, and things definitely pick up. Because, I mean, the thing with boot camps you have to remember is that it's an accelerated program. It's not normal school. It's not sitting in class, listening to a teacher, and then taking a test. It's fast and it's intense.
So what are the hours? When does it start? How many hours a day? Do you also have exercises, during or after, or both?
There's a couple different options with NSS. I'm doing the full-time boot camp, which the hours are basically like a regular workday. It's 9 to 4. I usually get there at 8 a.m. and leave at like 6 or 7 p.m. And then they also offer a nighttime course for, most folks or people that can't necessarily make the full-time commitment. That's like 3 or 4 nights a week for a couple hours. The curriculum is exercise as well. There are first lectures when introducing a new concept, and there's no tests involved. It's just projects. And basically, you're graded, I guess you could say, and I'm using like air quotes, graded on, whether or not you finish and sort of the quality of your code and how well you work in a team and how well you work and communicate with other people.
So you kind of study and then do the projects in teams or individually or both?
Mostly teams, except for the final capstone projects, which I'm working on my front-end capstone right now. But mainly teams. Mainly a lot of, pair programming and things like that for most of the projects until, like I said, the final capstones. When you're in the learning process of learning a new concept, like, say, for example, recently they introduced React to us. There were 3-hour lectures in the mornings, and then the afternoons were comprised of kind of lab time. And, lab time is you just go through the exercises that they provide. And if you have any questions, you're free to ask the teachers questions and things like that. So, yes, there is some opportunity to work on your own projects, but then the real big projects are the group projects, which are basically what they call your sprints at the end. Really, it's at the end of every month.
How many, participants, students are in the boot camp with you?
Right now, we have 24 or 25 people in my cohort. Right now, we actually just lost 2 people last week that dropped out. And within the first 2 weeks as well, we lost 2 people back in January. So we've lost a total of 5 people since the beginning of my particular cohort.
That's pretty normal too, I think. I've heard that, I don't know, mine lost about the same. So I think, I don't know, I would love to hear like Matt's thoughts on this a little bit, but I think for better or worse, like, I don't know. I mean, I want to be respectful of everyone's reasons for getting into programming, but I think some people look at it, like look at these boot camps just because maybe it's the way the boot camps have been marketed as like, you know, a quick 6-month, 3-month answer to like bills or something like that. And I think this kind of career, at least this is my own personal opinion, to be successful, you need to kind of like be curious and be passionate about it too. And I think sometimes like people drop off because they realize it's not easy. Like you have to really enjoy it to kind of like push through those blocks. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that's going to be typical of a lot of things like this. You know, coming from someone who's a firefighter, volunteer firefighter, we'll get people that come into academies and after a couple of weeks they realize, oh shoot, this isn't what I thought it was, or oh, this is too hard, or it's too time consuming, or whatever. I mean, it's not just programming. I can see this being true for any type of new experience that you jump into, that's especially something that's going to be as intense as a boot camp. You really got to want to do it and really have to understand what you're getting into.
I would like to add that based on Matt's description, there are two levels of intensity here. On the one hand, it's certainly intense in terms of the amount of studying. Studying for like 8 or 9 or 10 hours every day is just hard. So there's that. And also, I assume there's a financial hardship associated with it because you're effectively not bringing in any income during that entire time. And that's on top of the cost of the bootcamp itself.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I would agree with 100% of that. Before the boot camp, and that's what sometimes when I talk to people or say, like, do your due diligence beforehand or research, those points are exactly what I'm talking about is, yes, number one, that you're going to the right boot camp, but number two, you're going for the right reasons, I think is more important, and that you have an awareness of what you're getting into and what being a software engineer actually means.
One thing that I'm kind of curious about is you mentioned that you were self-teaching before you went to the boot camp. Do you feel like that's a necessary step? Can you kind of get away with skating until you get in?
It's hard to tell because there are people that have done both, and both ways they're successful people. But I think it's more beneficial to do your due diligence beforehand and prepare beforehand. I think you will set yourself up better for success after you graduate. You can definitely come out of the boot camp probably at a higher level, maybe more towards the mid than junior level developer than someone that didn't do anything before the boot camp. I would say that most people in my cohort didn't do anything before day one. There were a lot of people that came into the boot camp that didn't know what version control was and had only looked at JavaScript for 1 week. Versus myself, who had been self-studying for 9 months, and two other people that had been doing JavaScript for 2 years. So it kind of can go both ways, but I do think that at least some sort of pre-work, something beforehand goes a long way in the long run. And not only the technical aspect, but I think the mental preparation going in as well is super important.
So is that pre-work normally left up to the individual then, as compared to, say, the school saying ahead of time, hey, it's going to go better if you prepare ahead of time. Here's some suggestions of materials to go over before you actually start.
No, actually, we had assigned pre-work that they suggested we complete, which was really nice. And funny thing is, myself and only one other person were the only 2 people in my entire class that finished all of the pre-work. Fun fact, but yeah.
Yeah, I know that Flatiron School in New York City, they also offer like a boot camp kind of thing. And I think it's free, but they recommend it. In fact, they may even require, I can't remember the exact details, but they either very, very, very strongly recommended that people go through it, or they required it. And I can't remember which one.
So I actually have a question about that. So given what you said about different levels of preparation, and I assume also, for some people, some of the stuff comes more naturally than for others, or some people are faster learners or whatever. How does the course deal or the bootcamp deal over the long term? Because 6 months is pretty lengthy duration, with the different levels of knowledge and understanding that develop over time.
They deal pretty well. So there is a great I will say this, the teachers there and the TAs and junior instructors are really great in that they really support the students. So really any questions, they're always available, especially during those lab hours where you're kind of working through exercises on your own. A couple weeks in, it's definitely apparent who has done pre-work and who is, knows what they're doing and who isn't. And so a lot of times in those group projects, the teachers will assign, say, someone, like maybe one person that really knows what they're doing with 2 or 3 weaker people, so that, the whole group is kind of balanced out in terms of experience and skill levels.
I got 2 questions for you. Earlier, you said you want to make sure you pick the right boot camp. And I wanted to know what you meant by that.
So what I meant was, when researching boot camps, it's very important to make sure that it's not a scam and that you're getting your bang for your buck. Because like was mentioned earlier, I forgot who said it, but yeah, we are paying a lot of money for this, or at least I am. And I did save up enough money and expenses to, not have a job for 6 months. And so this is very important that I get a good education and get what I'm paying for. Unfortunately, there are boot camps and other programs out there that may be more of a scam, that may not be what you're looking for, might not be hard enough, especially just because, software development is kind of an in thing right now and the industry is growing and boot camps are very popular and attractive and, everyone wants to be a developer. So
do you think that they're really trying to scam people, or is it just that they're a lower cost, therefore it's a lower quality, or they have a different teaching style that fits a more niche group of people?
It could be a little bit of both. Perhaps they might be trying to gear towards a more niche group of people, but I have heard of some scams, not so much recently. That might have been a couple months ago or 6 months ago, back when I was doing some research. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that just as something to look out for, because I'm sure they are out there, but hopefully not.
Well, that makes sense, because whenever something's popular, you got the sales bros that get together and and the sales sisses. I'm sure them too. Let's not be exclusive. I have seen people go after things that they have absolutely no skill or knowledge in, but they learn just, one more word than the person they're next to, and it makes them sound like an expert in comparison. So I guess I could believe there are some scammy schools out there.
I think I scam too, maybe like in my experience and just in talking to people doing this type of thing, kind of like Matt mentioned, the vetting process in some of them is more like, hey, if you can pay the money, you're in. Whereas with NSS, I specifically know of people that have been turned down who, even though they did have the money. That was one thing that I think was really good about the school that I went to, and some of them is that they don't just take in anyone.
But if they turn down the people that won't do the pre-work, they'd only have 2 students per cohort. The other question I had was about preparation. So you said it's important to prepare. What does preparing mean? How does people they don't know anything, right? They're like, I've heard about this thing. Maybe I can get a job. Maybe I'll be good at it. I mean, a lot of them probably don't even really know much what to Google. So what does prepare mean in that context?
Preparing in that context, there are so many online resources, go to Code Academy. I used some of that. I don't know what the other online, free courses are, but go take some of those courses. See if you're into that kind of thing. See if you like it. If you enjoy it, keep going, keep teaching yourself. Perhaps maybe go to meetups if you can find any, if it's not a global pandemic like it is right now, or try and talk to someone. But basically, by preparing is just doing a little bit of it. See if you like it. Just like anything. I mean, you wouldn't go play a professional sport or something if you had no idea what it was. You would maybe go practice a little bit and see if you were good at it. See if you like it. Same type of deal. Same type of mentality.
And since you mentioned the pandemic, how's the bootcamp dealing with the current situation? And how are you dealing with the current situation within the context of your bootcamp?
There's both good and bad. I'm trying to see the positive in this because when this initially happened, I was a little bit disappointed just because all of us, including myself, are paying, a good amount of money for this bootcamp and for just the environment and experience that it offers to be able to go to school, be around other people learning, be around other students and the mentors and teachers and everything like that. As of has it been 3 weeks, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, Nashville has been in pretty much lockdown. And so we've been remote. And so that's been a change. It's been interesting. It worked out fairly well as far as my cohort and where we are in our program because we are starting our front-end capstones. We would be kind of on our own anyway. So we're not really doing lectures that much on, through Zoom or through Skype or anything like that. We're all just sort of on our own for the last 2 weeks. But yeah, I'm definitely interested. It's going to be interesting in the next coming weeks because we're going to start backend and do Python and lectures will all be online. And to add to that, I'm going to have to present my front-end capstone to 200 people remotely, which is also going to be interesting. So circling back, it's kind of disappointing that, I'm just at home now learning kind of where I started on my own instead of at school. But at the same time, it's good experience. And the positive that, I'm getting some sort of remote work experience and I can kind of maybe put that on my resume and say, hey, I have experience working remote. Like I know what it takes and I can focus and do my job well on my own.
I really, really like your attitude towards that. I think that's an excellent attitude to have. You mentioned some of the technical stuff, and I will want to get to that, but I have like 2 quick questions before that. So question number 1 is, in the context of the bootcamp, do they give you like written materials or online resources, or do they use like standard training or whatever, or is it just the information that they provide to you in the frontal instruction?
Yep. So for the pre-work they gave us specific resources to practice and to check out. And one of them was actually, I think, Code Academy. And my mind is slipping on the others. But yeah, they were specific online resources. They said, hey, go to these, do these courses, give us your username so we know that you've done it, and take these little assessment test things so that we know that you're sort of ready to start the program. And so that's kind of how the pre-work went. And then throughout the course, most of the curriculum is actually open source. You can find it on GitHub, actually. So yeah, we've just kind of been going through that. And so, yeah, it's there.
You mentioned, I'm learning skills as far as like working from home and stuff like that. And I'm a little curious there. It seems like, and I've talked to different people who've gone to different boot camps, and some of the boot camps, they taught them how to write code, but they didn't talk about code hygiene or system design or things like that. And they didn't teach them really any of the skills that they need to have in order to work on a team or follow an agile workflow or things like that they're going to need in order to work well on the job. I'm curious, how much of the focus is on the technology and how much of the focus is on actual job skills that you're going to need in order to do your job?
This is one. I actually like talking about this. This is kind of one of my pain points because I get both sides of this argument. 3 to 6 months is a very short amount of time, and it's really hard to fit everything that a junior developer or even any developer needs to know into that short of a time span. I do wish that there was a little bit more, I don't know what you would call it. There was more curriculum on code architecture and all the things you just spoke of, because it is pretty much just code. That's just one thing that I've been a little bit, it's hard to describe because the way that my mind works, I'm a very detail-oriented person. And that's the way that sort of I was trained with my previous career and previous job. So I like to, before I even start coding, sit back and really think about the architecture, what it's going to look like, how it's going to flow, what's the best way to do things. I've thought of, okay, here's the brute force way to do things. Is there a more optimal way before I even start coding? Unfortunately, a lot of people, I don't know how you would know that, and if you've never heard of anything like that before, but they don't necessarily teach that in the program. But, people go through fine.
I've got a question for you.
Sure.
My experience is architecture is often not as important until you've created your MVP, your minimum viable product, something that you can show to a customer and have them experience. Because I see a lot of people try to put a lot of emphasis on architecture and they just get it wrong because they're inexperienced and so they don't really know what patterns there should be anyway. So in terms of like a homework exercise, I think it's great, but I think in building a product, the less architecture that you put forth, the better, because then you're going to, because as you build it, unless somebody has given you really good specifications about what you're trying to build, unless they actually know what they want, which my experience is that most managers don't actually know what they want. And most, like you've got this huge big buffer, right? Like some customer says, hey, I think I want this thing. First of all, the customer's wrong. They don't actually know what they want. Then the sales guy interprets that. Then, he says, oh yeah, I've got 6 different people have said they want this kind of thing because he's just kind of jamming them all together. So then that gets pushed to the business decision maker. And then that gets pushed to the product manager. And then that gets pushed to the coding manager. So by the time you get instructions, you're getting them like sixth hand for a feature that's probably not necessary and was misunderstood in the first place. And
You're
then
such
you get
a
like
positive person, AJ. It's like based on your description, we're not doing any software design at all. We're just calling APIs all day long.
Well, that seems to be what it is anyway. But so then it gets to the software team, and then you've got like the big thinkers. They're like, oh yeah, we're going to make this really robust, and it's going to scale really well, and it's going to run on 6 million servers just fine. But in reality, like it just needs a proof of concept, and you could do it in a JSON file. You could do it in a Postgres database. Heaven forbid you use Mongo, but if you want to bury yourself in that, you can do that as well. And then afterwards, after you actually find out whether the customer says, oh yeah, this solves my problem, or how the heck did you come out with this from what I said? That's when you need the architecture. So do you have any thoughts on what I just said, Matt, to
I have
clarify?
thoughts.
Or
So do I.
You're wrong. How's that for thoughts? So what I'm talking about isn't like grand scale design. I'm talking about like design patterns and things like that are fairly simple ideas and ways of putting code together so that even if you're new, it's like, okay, I generally see how a problem like this could be solved with, general structures in the code. Because if you push off your architecture, then what you wind up doing in most of the systems, so in my experience, as you said, whatever architectural decisions I made up front are ones I'm going to have to live with and deal with further down the line. And so if I have just some ideas on how some of these issues are solved, it makes up a big difference down the line. I'm not thinking, grand scale architecture and do I use microservices or crap like that.
hey, that's an important decision that needs to be made up front, Chuck.
What I did want to ask you also, you mentioned some of the technologies that you learned during those first 3 months. I think you mentioned HTML, CSS, and of course JavaScript and React also. Can you elaborate a little bit about what did they actually teach you and how did they build one thing on top of the other? And do you feel like you know JavaScript now? And do you know what JavaScript even is?
Oh man, it's hard to say if you know something or not, because the more you know that you don't know.
I know Kung Fu.
Right. Yeah, no, it's actually an interesting process. And this kind of ties in a little bit with your question, Chuck. They kind of teach you some design patterns without saying that they're teaching you design patterns. And it's really cool because we started off, obviously HTML, CSS, that's fairly, I don't want to say basic, because you could teach someone CSS for 2 years and they probably would still not even know half of it. But
nobody knows half of it.
No one knows. But with JavaScript, so they started us off with basically vanilla JavaScript, just regular. I don't know. Some people don't like the term vanilla JavaScript, but I'll just use it for context right now.
We used to have a vanilla JS guy.
And it was really interesting because they started us off by building kind of components, but using vanilla JavaScript. And what I mean by that is like we would basically build a function that would return a HTML string template. And then we would have another function and another module that would say, call that, or you could pass that string template in and call that, and it would render it to the DOM. And these were all in their own modules. And it was kind of like having different components in React dealing with that flow and dealing with sort of modular code in that way. That was really interesting to me, not like me right now after the fact, and having dealt with and having experience in React and knowing kind of the flow and architecture of React, and that like using the vanilla JavaScript in that way was very similar and sort of a building block into React.
I wanted to say that's a really cool approach. I like it a lot.
Yeah, so like Matt and I had talked about that, and I thought that was super cool because like when I went through this, obviously it was 5 years ago, and like Angular JS was barely a thing, but I thought that was really creative of the school to do that and like start teaching students that right off the bat, because that is front end now, rather than just like, you'll still kind of get into like, spaghetti JavaScript, but doing it that way, I don't know. I feel like potentially like some of the students, like that's just all they know now. And so it kind of like helps them fall into the pit of success.
I totally agree. I think I don't know how far you got like with functional composition and higher order functions and stuff like that. But even if you didn't get that far, just the concept of properties in and HTML out, even if it's in the form of just a template string, I think that's a really cool approach and definitely leads to modular design. Like I said, I like it a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the struggles, at least right now, that I'm having with learning React is because we're basically using everything that is functional components and hooks. They aren't teaching class-based components. And so it's actually been pretty difficult to find help on the internet, because every time I look up something, it's all using classes and lifecycle methods. But so I would say for someone new, like it's actually kind of hard to learn a newer technology like that with a lot of out-of-date resources.
First of all, welcome to technology.
That's just the internet, man.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Dan, sorry, let me pipe in with this really quick. Like, I feel like what they're having to do is really valuable because, like you just said, I mean, that is very much what it's like on the job, is like having to teach yourself.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, occasionally, like if you work for bigger places, then they might organize like an instructor to come in, or maybe some online courses. But more often than not, you literally have to learn on the job. And, that means reading blog posts, reading articles, watching YouTube videos, and whatnot. And in any event, React with classes is so 2019. I mean, who works like that anymore? I actually think that, in a sense, it even gives you an advantage, because being able to go to a React shop and say, hey, I know hooks, that actually gives you an advantage over people who finished their bootcamp like a year ago. So revel in that. But yeah, that's interesting.
In JavaScript, there's always something new to learn. Frameworks, technologies, tools, updates. It's a lot of work to stay up on JavaScript. Educative.io helps with that. Their platform is made from the ground up with software engineers in mind. Instead of making you scrub back and forth through videos and spend hours on setup, their courses are text-based and feature live coding environments so you can skim back and forth like a book and practice in-browser as you learn. One course that I recommend if you've been laid off during the coronavirus scare is the JavaScript Interview Handbook. These courses cover topics from JavaScript to machine learning, Kubernetes, and much more. And each course has a free preview so you can poke around free of charge. On top of that, you can visit educative.io/jabber to get 10% off any course or subscription. Check it out today.
So are they also teaching you any form of state management, just out of curiosity, beyond like context and hooks, or like, I don't know, Redux or Mobix, or focusing mainly on React itself?
Focusing mainly on React itself. I kind of took it upon myself to use context in my most recent project. Definitely not Redux. They aren't going over that. It's just mainly everything that is React and, props and state management and everything like that.
It's actually also pretty, I think overall that's a good approach. I think overall that is what I would recommend. If, it's an interesting question of whether or not I would go with React so quickly. But on the other hand, you definitely need to get to marketable skills as quickly as possible. So I can understand that. But it seems to me that, if I had to build a bootcamp within the parameters of what you're trying to achieve, that's probably the path that I would go with as well.
I think it's great that they teach some JavaScript, because I think I've seen people get out of boot camps and they work at their job and they still don't have enough information and confidence to expand outward. They don't know JavaScript and they don't know where to go to learn what the next thing is. They just kind of get stuck in I'm doing React and I got hired to do React, and so I guess I'm doing React. And I don't know. I think it's really good that they teach a way for you to connect between this is what React script looks like, and this is kind of what, if you did it in JavaScript, it would look like.
I agree with what you said, AJ, but I think that one of the things about React, as opposed to some of the other frameworks that are out there, is React is actually kind of, how would I phrase it? It requires more JavaScript knowledge or know-how than some of the other frameworks. I mean, when you're working with JSX and you want to transform an array of values into divs or whatnot, or list elements, then you're going to be using map, as opposed to some other frameworks which have their own templating language, which is not JavaScript. Now, I'm not saying that this is good or bad. I'm just saying that React kind of forces you to be more knowledgeable about JavaScript, I think.
Yeah, and to add to that point, I think that was probably one of the biggest problems for many people in the class is, yes, the knowledge and just the abstraction that React provides versus using vanilla JavaScript, because there were a lot of people that were really, really good using vanilla JavaScript and, writing spaghetti code or whatever, because it's so, what's the word? Maybe it just explicit on every step of the way and every detail. And this goes here and has to be in this order and this and this and this, versus React, which is just everything is not everything, but a lot of things are abstracted from, the developer. And it's sometimes very hard to wrap your brain around what's going on inside of the code and what's going on inside of the app and what's getting passed, down through props, and what are props and why do I have to manage state? I never had to do that before. Why do I have to do that now? So it can be a learning curve for sure for someone that is not used to it. I think for myself, and talking about the preparation, I think with React, that's where it came most in handy, is a lot of the preparation that I did and the reading and, reading about classes, even though we don't really use classes, and reading about why do we use, let and constant, we don't use var anymore, and what is hoisting, what's the event loop, reading about all these different ideas that make up JavaScript and how they're implemented really helped beforehand.
In that context, before you ask your question, I just want to highly recommend Kyle Simpson, Getify's book, You Don't Know JavaScript. So if you have any aspect of JavaScript which you feel kind of uncertain about, and that doesn't just go to you, that goes to all our listeners. I'll probably mention it in picks again. Kyle's books are just an excellent resource. But go on, Amy.
Yeah, big Kyle Simpson fangirl, so for sure. But what I was just going to say is that kind of what Matt was just saying, circles back to what I was kind of saying at the beginning about, those that are successful in their bootcamp and after versus those who realize maybe it's not their thing. Is I think, to be successful, you do have to have a higher level of curiosity. And because when you hit a bug, you want to know why, and you want to know those things outside of React. If you have some sort of race condition, you need to understand what the event loop is. So you understand how that race condition is happening. And I just think if you don't have that curiosity, it's going to be a little bit harder to really go far in your career.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that the curiosity is kind of the main point, and that's probably something that you can identify pretty early on in your learning, is if you really have that curiosity or not, because that is what's going to drive you to keep learning things, to keep searching for new things to learn, especially, as things get stale on the job, like what's the next thing that I can move on to, stuff like that.
I agree with what you're saying, but I would use a term slightly different than curiosity. My experience with the software development field has been that there are people who are passionate about it, and there are people who are less so, that maybe for them it's just a job. Now, that's legitimate. I mean, everybody needs to make a living, and undoubtedly software development can be a profitable field. But the people who are really successful in it are people who happen to be really passionate about it. Now, where this passion comes from, I don't know. Maybe it's intrinsic. Maybe it's something you get over time. But, they say that a really successful software developer is somebody who's happy to be paid for something that he would do for free. That's obviously a bit of an extreme statement, but I do think that it's that passion that makes the difference between people who are more successful and people who are less so, especially given the intensive situation that you're describing in the context of a bootcamp.
Yeah, definitely agree with that.
One thing that I wanted to circle back to at the beginning, I don't know if we've ever talked about this actually in the whole time that I've been on the show, but Dan, did you say that your son was studying music?
Yes, I have 3 kids, and the middle one is actually studying to become a drummer. Yes.
Okay, but it was your daughter who was studying computer science, not him, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Interestingly, both my sons are not so much into it. My older son is starting to kind of be interested because he's getting to the point where he also needs to think about the job market and whatnot. And he has friends who are working in the tech field, and he sees that they're making a nice living. So he's kind of curious on that front. And he's been into math and physics, but not really into computers. So he's considering it. But my daughter is really into this stuff, yes.
Okay. Well, but again, circling back to what we were talking about, like passion and what I was saying, curiosity, however you really want to describe it, I'd be curious, has anybody else on the panel a musician, and like the parallels between music and programming, and even like the parallels between like the passion and drive, but more specifically, like those parallels between music and programming? I guess the first question, like, is anyone else on the panel a musician? I'm obviously not.
I was in a past life when I was growing up. I played trumpet.
Maybe Steve and Matt. I don't know if like Matt wants to start kind of talking about like what parallels he sees there, and then I'd be curious, Steve, your thoughts, because I see so many musicians become really successful developers. I'm kind of jealous.
I'm a wedding DJ. Does that count?
I forgot about that.
Oh, I thought you were a wedding singer. Gosh, no, you're a wedding DJ. That's right. Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of, I have 2 answers. I think number one is, the first thing that comes to mind is kind of the pattern recognition. That's kind of intrinsic to being a musician. And the second is, I think, the learning how to learn and the learning to basically be disciplined enough to practice on your own, practicing perfecting your craft. I think those are the 2 things that kind of make the parallel. I know for a fact that, when I went in for my interview for NSS, John, the CEO, he specifically said that they like admitting musicians, because he said for some reason, musicians just have a knack for programming, which is also, it's just interesting to me as well. But I think it is just the pattern recognition. Programming is kind of like learning a new language, just like learning how to read music is also learning a new language. And then as well, like I mentioned, the practicing on your own. I can speak for myself as a drummer. There was a year and a half where, I practiced for 3-4 hours a night, every night of the week after working for 8 or 9 hours during the day. And that was my life. That's what I wanted to do. And, that's what I knew it would take to get better, or to get as best as I could. And so that's what I did.
You probably gave me an idea for another pick for today, which is going to be the book Gödel, Escher, Bach, which kind of discusses this relationship between art, music in particular, and mathematics, be that as it may.
Yeah, Dan, you just stole my thunder, just to sort of echo what Matt is saying. I see it as the structure, computer programming, if you want to be successful, you got to have some structure and some organization to your code. Matt had mentioned when you're first learning JavaScript, I think they talked about how things could turn into spaghetti code sometimes, but you got to be very highly structured. Music's that way. You have your, notes there in certain places. You have structures in terms of your chords and what notes fit into each chord, chord progressions for a song that actually sounds good and so on. And I see a lot of that as well, in mathematics and science to a certain degree. When I'm helping my kids with their math, it's very similar in terms of it's highly structured, it's rules. If you follow the rules, generally things are going to work well. So yeah, there's a lot of very similarities. And I have heard other musicians who have gotten into programming, and there's a couple coming to mind that I've heard in the past, and I cannot remember who used their programming in producing music and some of the things that they've been able to do with programming coming from a musical background. So yes. And actually, there's one other thing I wanted to circle back to. We were talking about, Matt was talking about, the passion in wanting to learn programming and to get better at it. When I first got into the software industry back about 25 years ago, I started out coming from a banking background and I got into banking software. But I found that I really liked the software side of things. But if I had stayed in what I was doing and just learned my job and stuck with that job, I wouldn't be where I am now. But everything I've learned through the years, whether it was first getting into straight HTML web development in the late 90s, learning Drupal and getting into Drupal, and then learning JavaScript and getting into Vue development, was all on my own. It was outside work, after hours, in the evening, working on side projects, finding online courses, going to meetups, all that kind of stuff was just a passion. And it was a curiosity and a desire to be able to do that well that made me learn it on my own. And that got me ahead of where I would have been if I had just stayed in my, my old job and followed that progression.
So just to emphasize that point that Steve made, I'm also been in this field for a very long time. And even though I went through, I wouldn't call it more standard, but I went through the process of going to university and studying for a bachelor's degree in computer science and then a master's degree in computer science. And I have to tell you that everything I do today has absolutely nothing to do with all the topics that I studied, except the learning how to learn and some of the thought processes that are associated with creating software. But in terms of the technologies, the programming languages that I use, HTML did not exist when I finished my bachelor's degree. It was just starting to come into being. So yeah, definitely the fact, Matt, that you have to learn stuff on your own because they're going with React and hooks, and you're not finding a whole lot of material about that ready-made. Get used to it.
Great. I'm super excited.
By the way, you mentioned that you have a project that you're currently working on that you will have to shortly present. What is that project, if you can say?
Sure. So the idea for it is kind of funny. So I'm a huge fan of roller coasters, big roller coaster nerd. And it's basically an app to record roller coaster credits for people. So within the roller coaster community, when you ride a roller coaster, you get a credit on that roller coaster. And it's a very simple app. It just performs basic CRUD, using like RESTful API. I have authentication through Auth0. I have, React testing library and Jest. I might implement some more technologies if I have time. But yeah, basically it just records users' credits. They have a profile. It populates a huge list of roller coasters and theme parks and where they are in the country or the world. And they can kind of add things and they can build their profile out with, all of the rides they've ridden. And then I have kind of a forum or messaging system type thing where they can talk to other people using the app. And so, yeah, it's pretty simple, but I'm having a lot of fun doing it.
Sounds really cool. And if I can ask, where are you storing your data persistently?
Right now, I am using JasonServer because that's just what we have been using so far during the class. So a stretch goal of mine is definitely to use a different database, maybe like MongoDB or store it with Auth0. I know that Auth0 has sort of a management API where you can store stuff with them, although I was having a little bit of trouble figuring that out from the get-go, just because it's all new to me, and it was just kind of taking a little bit longer than I would have liked, so I just decided to do it the easier way in the essence of just meeting MVP.
So why are people using Mongo? I don't get it.
I can speak to this a little bit.
It's like the worst possible database. It's like worse than MySQL.
We're actually going to have the dev advocate of Mongo on in a couple of weeks, so give him a chance. I would say, at least for me, like my bootcamp, that's what we used. And it's because of how friendly the documentation is. They have phenomenal documentation. So I think the onboarding experience is pretty good. That said, I've also played around with JasonServer, and it's something that I've considered implementing at work because it is really, really, really cool. Like it's something that you can use kind of as, at least for what we were thinking of doing it at work, is we don't really have any sort of like API contract between the back end and front end. So it's something where you can just have that like JSON file, like a very rudimentary approach to having some sort of documentation would be just having that JSON file, and QA can consume it for mocks and stuff like that. So JasonServer is kind of neat. And I'm assuming, Matt, do you know if they get into, like, will you use Postgres or something like that when you move on to Python? I'm assuming that's the case.
I think so. I'm actually not super positive on that.
And you mentioned Jest. So did they actually teach you testing frameworks so far?
They did not. I actually taught myself most of that. Well, taught myself, and then a mentor helped me out a little bit to get started with testing.
Cool. And how about building some sort of CICD flow?
Yep, that's going to go into my project as well. They have not really talked about that in the coursework either, but that is sort of a stretch goal, and definitely something I want to put into my project.
All I can say is be careful of putting too much stuff into your project.
I know, I'm sorry. I get excited and I want all of it, but I'm running out of time at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Don't lose view of your primary goal. Remember what you're trying to achieve and don't get sidetracked.
That's smart.
Exactly. It's so hard because, I mean, just coming from, creating it as a process, like it's so exciting to use all this technology, but at the end of the day, it's like a feature only needs to be there if it's like absolutely necessary. Other than that, like, don't do it.
That's a good approach. And with CI/CD, the main purpose of CI/CD is to make your deployment process go from seconds to fractions of an hour. So just bear that in mind. Because I've never heard someone say, man, I'm so glad we deploy so much quicker now that we have CI/CD. It always seems to be, man, now it takes like 20 minutes for us to get one change through.
Yeah, flaky tests. We love flaky tests.
Are you stuck at home climbing the walls when you should be hanging out with the community at the latest conference to get canceled? Are you wondering where to hear your JavaScript heroes like Amy Knight and Douglas Crockford and Chris Heilman? After the cancellations, I decided to put on a JavaScript conference for you, online. I invited my favorite folks from around the web and got them to come speak at an online event just for you. Go to jsremoteconf.com and check out our speakers and schedule. The conference is on May 14th and 15th. The call for proposals is open until March 31st. Come join us at an online conference that we guarantee will keep you safe and keep you informed. jsremoteconf.com. All right, well, let's get to some picks. AJ, do you want to start us off with picks?
I'll pick a pick that I don't actually have any experience with or any right to pick, which is Postgres, because
That's an awesome name.
I think it basically does what Mongo does, like gives you really nice documentation and a really nice API into Postgres, but allows you to actually optimize your database the way you'd normally optimize a database afterwards. Having not picked it, just having heard about it. And then another one is PostgreSQL for people that are of that school of torture. That's another one. But, well, I guess I will pick Postgres. I think Postgres is an amazing database. It perhaps tries to do too many things in that it has everything that you'd ever need built in. You've got full text search, you've got JSON support, you've got message queues. I mean, like, You name it. If you want it in a database, Postgres has got it. Doesn't necessarily mean that you should use every feature, but if you just need to prototype something, Postgres, like literally, it's got everything you could possibly want. And as a structured queryable database, it's actually pretty darn efficient and beats out most of the competition. So I really like Postgres. I find the documentation to be, I guess, above board for SQL documentation, but that doesn't really say much. SQLite probably has the best documentation, and even theirs is kind of difficult to understand between the actual implementation and the specified behavior sometimes. And then let's see, I'm gonna have to pick, I might have already picked this, but I'm gonna have to pick The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I'm now listening to the second book, Words of Radiance, with my wife, and we both love it. And I really do think that this is going to turn out to be his finest work. The fourth book is just about to come out. And then the fifth book, as I understand it, will end the first character arc or the first story arc. And then there's going to be another 5 books. He has completed a number of trilogies or better, and he kind of is in progress of a couple more. So I do have faith that he will finish his books, because he has finished books, and more than just one trilogy. He's finished multiple trilogies, and he's even finished other authors' books that had passed before their time. Well, maybe not before their time, but before they were done with their book.
That was before their time when Robert Jordan passed.
I don't know anything about his death.
No, he wasn't supposed to die until he was done writing those books.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if it was natural causes or a strange disease. I had no information.
I don't remember.
Well,
So
on the positive side of the coronavirus, it's forcing George R.R. Martin to sit down and finish his books.
I thought HBO
Who's
finished that series for him.
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
it'll be interesting to see if he's influenced by the series. Hopefully not by season 8.
Sorry. Okay, we went way off on a tangent. Anyway, AJ.
I think that's all I've got for now. And I'll pick VirtualBox. It's terrible to use. It's such a monstrous pain, but it gets the job done, and there's not many things in the way of an alternative. So and it works on all 3 platforms. So I'll pick VirtualBox. If you ever need to run Windows on Mac, or Mac on Linux, or Mac on Windows, or whatever it is, VirtualBox is a tool that will work.
Are you actually allowed to run a Mac inside VirtualBox?
Now, whether or not you're allowed to and whether or not you can are different. You can download from Apple free of charge. In fact, I created a website about it, so I'll put that in there, bootableinstaller.com. You can download free from Apple the Mac OS operating system without the App Store, without any hoopla. Well, there is hoopla, because you have to then extract the package and then create the disk image and then copy the install base into the disk image. So there is a little bit of hoopla. But everything that you need is available freely from the Apple website. Now, when you go to click I accept as you're installing it, that's a different story. But for the types of reasons that you need to run Mac in a virtual machine, being that you're preparing for a developer job and you don't have the money for a Mac yet, or that you need to do some sort of rescue system task and you need to be able to have access to Mac tools, what are they going to do? Who cares?
All right. Dan, what are your picks?
So I mentioned Gödel Escher Bach. It's been like decades since I've read it, so I won't say much about it except that I vaguely remember it being an excellent book, so it's recommended. It's less about the direct connection between math and music and the arts. It's more about the thinking processes behind all 3 of them. And like I said, a fantastic book, a really heavy book, but it's recommended. The other thing that I would like to recommend is, now that I'm kind of stuck indoors, it's really great that I can actually exercise indoors. We have an indoor bike, and I ride it every day, and I do sit-ups and push-ups and whatnot. And it's really important to get the body working and not just, veg out in front of your screen the whole day long. Really helps me keep my sanity, I think. And the last thing that I want to pick is, I want to, give out a shout out to literally all the governments in the world for how well they've handled this whole Corona thing. I think we really need to applaud all the governments of all the countries for doing such a great job about everything having to do with the coronavirus. So yay, governments.
All right, Amy, what are your picks?
The first one, I think I saw this on Hacker News on Sunday. I know we usually do an episode on like the state of JavaScript every year. So this was the state of microservices in 2020. So it gets into not only like backend, but the different front end patterns that are emerging too. So I thought that was pretty good. And then the other one I'm going to do, I am absolutely obsessed with it, piggybacking on to what Dan said. So I'm usually pretty darn frugal, but because of lockdown, and because I got a stress fracture in my foot last year, I'm not able to run every day like I used to. So I've been doing spin at the gym. And when the gym closed, I couldn't do that anymore. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to run every day. So I gave in and ordered a Peloton bike. I'm freaking obsessed with it. So they are rather expensive, but I, as someone who's like very cautious with money, if you're on the fence, I like cannot say enough good things about it. And if you are on there and want to follow me, I think my name is Amy Skate, AIMEESK8. But yeah, can't say enough good things about the Peloton bike. I'm absolutely obsessed with it. And that's going to be it for me.
Why does a bike need a social app?
So I kind of have the same question, but I guess I would say, especially if you're, I don't know, I feel like most people, their complaint with working from home is you don't really get the atmosphere of being in the gym. And if you're like a little bit competitive and people around you are like breaking a sweat and, you know, hitting PRs, personal records and stuff like that. By having like the social aspect of it, you can actually see people who have taken, there's like different screens you can use. So you can see like the people who've taken the class, every single person in the entire history that's ever taken the class, and you can see their stats. You can see the people that are logged into the exact same class that you're doing at that exact same time and see their stats. You can see your stats. There's actually like live classes that you can join, and you can see the stats of the people there. You know, before coronavirus, there are people actually like in there taking the class, but you can see their stats. So all that to say, it's a really good way of just kind of like making sure that you're pushing yourself while you're still doing a workout at home.
I'm just old. I don't care for that stuff.
Says the guy doing push-ups and stuff at home.
Yeah, well.
You're making me feel lazy, you people. Those Peloton bikes, they look really nice, and they also look really expensive.
They are, but oh my gosh, it's just such a smooth ride. I absolutely love it. Like, it's worth every penny. And the way I guess I justified it for myself is I calculated how much time I'm spending driving to and from the gym every morning and like the gas savings. And I think as long as I use my free time wisely that I would have been spending in the car, it'll actually like save money in the long run.
I'll give you a tip. You don't need to justify it to anybody. You're an adult who's working and earning income, and you can spend your money whatever way you want.
Thank you.
Don't listen. It's a trap.
No,
He's
it's not
trying
a trap.
to manipulate you.
It's not a trap. She's not married yet. For me, it's a trap.
Oh, I was just kidding anyway.
Yeah, those look super nice. But yeah, I'd have to make a deal with my wife. Steve, what are your picks?
So just to follow up real quick with what Amy was saying, I belong to a CrossFit gym. You know, obviously around here, all the gyms have been closed, like most places. And so we did something yesterday where one of our coaches put together, we use an app called SugarWOD that everybody can track their workouts and so on. But she put out a workout, and then we all got together on a Zoom call. And so people use their cell phones, or I use my laptop and just put it, and we were all in our, garages or houses or wherever we had a space to work out. And then we just all worked out at the same time and synced up over Zoom. It was actually pretty fun. It's obviously not the same as being in the gym, but it was actually fun. Sort of got the community feel without actually being together. So a couple of picks. One I made a few weeks ago when I first got it on another podcast, but for people like Chuck and I who are, shall we say, follically challenged, my wife got me a gift called the Skull Shaver. And
don't talk about my follicles that way.
Or lack thereof. Yeah, I have the same challenge.
Oh, I have follicles.
Where on your body exactly?
Oh, I didn't say functional follicles. Anyway.
So it's called the Pitbull Gold Pro Head and Face Shaver, and it's skullshaver.com, and it is really a good shaver, better than any electric shaver I've had. My wife got it for me for my birthday, so I've had it for a couple of months now, and I've really gotten to like it because it's almost as good as like a straight razor or a regular razor with a blade. So really good. It's got a couple different heads. It's easy to clean and a little spendy, but well worth it. The second is a video that I saw yesterday on YouTube. It's by a group called the 1026 Music Group. And it's a whole bunch of people doing one song from their cell phones. And then it's all put together and edited and stuff so you can see all their faces and hear everything together. And it's an a cappella version of a hymn called It Is Well With My Soul. Absolutely fantastic song. It obviously took a lot of editing.
I love that song.
Oh, it's so great. But it's a cappella, and all the people have really great voices, and you can see them, and it's fantastic. The song itself has an interesting backstory. Real quick, this guy was a lawyer named Horatio Spofford. He was a lawyer in Chicago in the 1800s, and he had quite a big real estate portfolio and was doing well. Well, then the Great Chicago Fire came along, wiped out everything he had. And then not long after that, his 4-year-old son died of scarlet fever. So he still had his wife, he and his wife and their 4 daughters. And so in 1873, they decided to go take a vacation in Europe, and they were all going to sail together on a ship. And he had to stay behind for some business, and his wife and his daughters went ahead. Well, during the journey across the sea, their ship was rammed by another ship, and all his 4 girls died, and his wife was saved. And so it was just he and his wife left. So as he's sailing across the ocean to meet his wife, the captain of the ship points out, hey, we're about at the spot where your daughters went down. And as he was going over that spot, he wrote, It Is Well With My Soul. And it's a well-known hymn that's been around, obviously, since the 1870s. But it's a great hymn and a really fantastic performance of it on this video.
Awesome. Let me throw some picks in. So I think last week I picked the book that I'm reading, so I think I'm going to skip it. But when we recorded React Native Radio before this show, people were picking what they were doing because they're stuck at home. And it kind of occurred to me that I had been doing some stuff with my kids. So I'm going to throw some of this stuff out at you. One of them is the book, The Hobbit. I've been reading The Hobbit to my kids, and they're really, really enjoying it. We just got to the part where Bilbo kind of falls off to the side into the dark part of the tunnel while the dwarves are running away from the goblins. And you kind of know what happens next if you know how the story goes or if you've seen the movie. But
yeah, my precious.
Yeah, the next chapter is called Riddles in the Dark. So there you go. Really enjoying that. So I'm going to pick the book, The Hobbit. I'm also going to pick just reading to your kids. I know not everybody has kids that want them to read to them or even has kids, depending on your family situation. But, go find some kids in your life and read to them. It makes a big difference, and it's a big thing.
I just wanted to make a quick comment. It's an interesting story about the Hobbit. So during the 70s, Israeli pilots who were captured, those planes were shot down over Egypt, and they were in captivity for months, even years. And during that time, they literally had nothing to do with themselves. The conditions were really bad. Some of them were tortured, and they literally had no way to pass the time. One of them managed to get a copy of The Hobbit, and they actually they created the first translation of that book into Hebrew while they were in captivity. So that's how they kind of pass the time. So it's just interesting, your story about, we're kind of in Corona captivity in a sense. Obviously, you can't really compare, but it's still interesting to see that, kind of reminded me of that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Honestly, I love those stories because stuff like that is just inspiring, and, what people do to get by in really kind of terrible circumstances. I mean, we don't have it as bad as all that, but yeah, people are great. The other thing that I've been doing with my kids is playing Dungeons and Dragons. And so I am going to put in for the link on my pick, the starter set for Dungeons and Dragons. If you haven't ever played before, makes it really, really easy to get in and get started. And then you can kind of start to figure out the rules and the situation that you're in. But that'll get you started without having to do a lot of the extra work to set up. and you can just roll and play some of the adventures. But that's been a ton of fun. Anyway, those are my picks as far as what I've been doing. And then just a quick reminder, JS Remote Conf, jsremoteconf.com. I'm also going to be putting on stuff for React Native, iOS, and Rails. If you're interested in those topics, we're going to have conferences for them too. And then I'm also putting on the meetups in April. So definitely go check those out. Just devchat.tv/meetups. If this episode goes out after some of those meetups, I am planning on continuing to do them. So just keep that in mind. Matt, do you have some picks for us?
Sure, I got a couple. Speaking of the fitness stuff, there's a good YouTube channel that I watch from time to time. His channel is called Swolenormous. Great name. But being an ex-personal trainer and strength coach myself, I can definitely vouch for him and say that his information is pretty good. It's awesome. It's very straightforward, no fluff. That's the way that I like it. No shortcuts, the real deal. Not your regular Instagram, whatever you want to call it. Just good camera angles and weird workouts that don't actually do anything. So into fitness stuff where you want fitness advice, Swolenormous, great YouTube channel. My next one is another YouTube channel called Fireship. I like watching videos because I'm very visual most of the time. And Fireship literally has everything programming from front end to infrastructure, DevOps to back end. It's really good for quick tips or just getting, a quick overview of something or watching a tutorial, things like that, because a lot of times I find myself reading some of these articles like on Medium and everything else on the internet. And I don't know, sometimes for me, it's a little bit more confusing than helpful. And so watching a video is just better for me personally. And because there's just so many opinions out there and like right and wrong ways to do things. And I feel like sometimes the person writing it could have summarized what they said in 3 sentences rather than, 5 pages. So just good videos, pretty concise. They're usually like either from 1 minute to 4 minutes in length. Really good if you're just trying to get a high level overview of some topic that you're trying to research. So those are my picks.
I forgot one other pick that I was going to make, and that's JavaScript Weekly. So if you go to javascriptweekly.com, I think, or jsweekly.com, it's a newsletter that you get in your email every week. And that's a source that I use just to stay current. So javascriptweekly.com. All right, Matt, if people want to check out what you're working on or get in touch with you or anything like that, ask questions about Nashville Software School, how do they find you online?
Yeah, sure. My Twitter handle is mgcrook. I think my Instagram is the same, mgcrook. And then I'm on LinkedIn as well at mattcrook11, I think. And then, GitHub. And that's pretty much it. Everything is usually just either Matt Crook or MG Crook.
Nice. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap it up right here. Thanks for coming and talking to us. It's always interesting to see what it's like to get into the industry because it changes every few years.
Yeah, it was awesome. And thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
All right. Till next time, folks. Max out.
Bye.
Adios.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.